Hi, this is Debbie, and today I have an ink blended card inspired by some Christmas ornaments that I saw recently. Rather than the traditional red, I love the deep burgundy of these ornaments with a beautiful gold detailing around them. To recreate the gold detailing, I'm going to use one of the images from the henna pattern set by Simon Says Stamp, and I'm going to stamp that 3 times across a piece of white card. I've got the image lined up on the door of the MISTI, and I'm going to be doing some heat embossing, and so I'm going to treat the card with some EK Success powder tool, which will stop the embossing powder sticking where I don't want it to. I'm going to stamp the image in clear embossing ink from Simon Says Stamp, and then once I've done that, I'm going to move the card down, and I'm going to use the grid mat to help me work out how many squares I'm moving the card down until the image lines up just above the first image, before stamping the image again in clear embossing ink. And then I'm going to move the card upwards, and this time move it above the middle point so that I can get the third image lined up in a row. With the stamping now done, I'm going to sprinkle some white embossing powder from Simon Says Stamp over the top of the 3 images, tap that off, and then I'm going to make sure my heat tool is good and hot before melting the embossing powder. I created some masks for the border by stamping the image onto some post-it note that has adhesive over the whole of the back and then trimming them out. I've then laid the masks over the border and given them a really good rub down to make sure that they adhere fully to the raised lines of the heat embossing. I've picked out some distressings, and I wanted to use tattered rose and aged mahogany to get a gradient of colour and a nice burgundy. And I wasn't sure if the aged mahogany was going to be a warm enough tone, and so I pulled out the festive berries as well, but in the end I didn't end up needing it. Starting with the tattered rose, and I'm using a Ranger Mini ink blender, I'm making sure I get a good lot of colour down. I'm not being too precise about making sure that my blend is really smooth, as I know that I really want to give this a lot of splatters and detail afterwards, so if the blending isn't perfect, that will be hidden by all the splatters later. When I'd got a base down of the tattered rose, I then started bringing in the aged mahogany, and it was at this point that I realised that this was going to have that lovely rich warm tone that I wanted. I'm going to show you the full ink blended process, although obviously this is sped up slightly. However, this will give you an appreciation of how messy this ink blending can look before it starts to look nicer later on. So I'm going to play some music and I'll be back shortly. As you can see, the ink blending was far from perfect. However, that's okay, because I'm now going to add lots of splatter detail, which is going to disguise any imperfect ink blending and add a lot of interest to the panel. I'm starting by adding some water droplets, leaving those for a second and then dabbing up the colour that's lifted. And then I'm going to come in next with some Heidi Swapp, that's the Colour Shine in gold, and give that a good splattering over the background as well. Next I'm going to bring in some Winsor & Newton white gouache and splatter that all over the background. And then finally I'm going to bring in some watercolour, and I've got a deep burgundy in my watercolours, and I'm mixing that up with a bit of water and splattering that all over the background. With all the splattering now complete, I want to lift the mask quickly because I don't want any of the paint and such like to soak through. And this is my favourite part, when you lift the mask and see the beautiful crisp clean white underneath. I now want to add some gold to the area that's been revealed by the mask, and I'm using some Schmincke gold paint, which is quite opaque, and I'm painting that over the white heat embossed area, and the white heat embossing will resist the paint, so you'll still be able to see the white embossed lines. I'm using this Schmincke gold paint. However, if that's not readily available to you, I'm sure that the Finetec gold or the Zig gold would work equally as well. I've put that panel to one side to dry while I work on the sentiment, and I've got this Believe die from Simon Says Stamp, and I've cut it from some gold shimmery card which came as an assortment pack, again from Simon Says Stamp. And I think that's going to look lovely laid above and slightly overlapping the border. I felt I wanted the die cut to have a little bit more substance though, and so I've cut it several times from the gold cardstock, and then I'm going to adhere one on top of the other with a quickie glue pen. I'm sorry I went off camera slightly while I was doing this. I think I added 3 layers in the end. It wasn't excessively chunky, but it did just add that little bit of height that meant I didn't need to add a sentiment with foam adhesive. It then meant I simply needed to add some Ranger Milder Medium in matte to add it to the panel. And then I added foam adhesive to the back of the panel before mounting that onto a marshmallow card base. While I had the Ranger Milder Medium in matte out, I also added some sequins and rhinestones to the panel. And then I was looking at it and wondering whether to leave it with just the Believe sentiment, but I felt it needed something a little bit more. And so I took the In the Magic of Christmas sentiment from the Believe stamp set, and I'm going to stamp that in some clear embossing ink and then gold heat emboss it. I've trimmed the sentiment down and then added it with some foam adhesive below the Believe die cut so the finished sentiment says Believe in the Magic. And that completes this card, which is inspired by some Christmas ornaments I saw recently with their beautiful mahogany tones with gold detailing. I'll leave links to the products that I've used in the YouTube description below, as well as a link to my coordinating blog post over at limedoodledesign.com. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.